I know we live in a just tell people state, but I'm going to record this also, so I'm just telling you. So I can listen to it when I go home and then think of all the places I messed up before it gets posted.
All right. Well, thanks to both of you for being here. I'm Aaron Mesh. I'm the news editor here at Willamette. This is Lucas Manfield, our crime reporter, crime courts cops.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have both of you here this evening. This is the contest for House District 35. We appreciate the two of you finding time after hours. So, without further ado, I believe that you're the incumbent, correct? No.
No.
Is there an incumbent in this?
It's an open seat, as far as I know.
Well then, all the more exciting. Farah, why don't you start us out?
With who I am.
Sorry, of course. This is probably your first time doing this with us.
I did it in May, but I don't want to assume.
So we would ask that. Sorry, this is like my fifth of the day, and I'm very tired. So I may not get all the things right I should be doing here. Let me give you a little background. So the goal this evening is to get to know the two of you, so we can decide which of you we're going to endorse on October 19th. It's not a debate, so we're not actually necessarily asking the two of you to like fight each other here. We're just looking for a conversation that you have with us. We may not give you equal time. We might ask one of you more questions than the other, and that is not necessarily because it is an indication of which way we're going to endorse. It just means that we're trying to get to the bottom of questions that we have. You're welcome to engage with each other, although again we ask that you be respectful, not interrupt each other. And the thing I was going to ask each of you to do is that you would introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves, why you're running for office, and then I would ask the first of you who speak, tell us just a little bit about the contours of your district. In other words, like what is the geographic boundaries of the office that you're seeking, and if there are any points about the constituency or the parameters. What do they call it? The districting, the mapping of this district. Then the other one wants to respond to it. It's fine. But anyway, enough of me talking. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Farah Chaichi. Thank you for meeting after hours. I think that was my fault because of my day job, so I really appreciate it. I'm running for House District 35, which is Beaverton, Aloha. It's a lot of unincorporated Washington County, so a lot of people who haven't previously had, well, they've had just their state legislature as their representation and their county commissioner. The boundaries go all the way from 217 into Hillsborough. I think it's like 206 maybe, and the most prominent road as the northern boundary would be Walker, and then bottom is sometimes Farmington, sometimes TV Highway.
Got it. And this is an open seat, if memory serves, because something like this seat, although the boundaries have shifted somewhat, was held by Jeff Barker for a long time, right?
Correct. And then Winston Campos had the seat, and she decided to run for the Senate.
And so here we are. Tell us about yourself and why it is you're running.
I am a lifelong Beavertonian, and I got involved in politics around 2014, local politics. I was working a job that it sucked, and I realized if I didn't start doing something that I cared about, I was going to lose my mind. So I got appointed to the city's Human Rights Advisory Commission and started showing up at city council, realizing that I had to testify, not just to try to email them or talk to them outside, and then realizing that the city council didn't exactly reflect my values, and showing up for other candidates. And then those candidates had friends running in other races. I joined the County Democratic Party, the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, which does something similar to what you're doing. They interview and endorse candidates, which gave me a lot of insight into how this whole thing operates. And a lot of people thought, yeah, running for legislature, that makes sense. You're a civics nerd, but it really wasn't something that I was planning to do. But my dad is an immigrant from Iran, and my mom is from an orchard in the Dalles. And those are two very diverse backgrounds that I think really encompass the people and experiences in our district. And as a young working class woman of color who rents, those are really big experiences that have historically not been represented in the legislature. And if I want those experiences represented, why should I wait for somebody else to do it? Why would I expect somebody else to step up? I should step up.
Great. Please introduce yourself.
All right. I'm Daniel Martin. I was born in Chicago. I moved here at age 6 to Carlton and lived in Carlton for pretty much my whole elementary years. Moved out to Gresham, where I was first introduced to Willamette Week back in 1970, I think it was 69. Anyway, I joined the Navy and was a medical corpsman for the Navy for 4 years and 2 years reserves out of Swan Island. I was in the 6th Fleet, so I got some time on a ship. As a corpsman, you're kind of the doctor, so you have credentials that allow you to do almost everything a doctor would, but you have the supervision of a doctor behind you. I got out of the Navy, went to New Mexico. Well, I drove across the country zigzagging and meeting all the friends that I once had in the Navy. And a guy, Bob Medina, told me to come to New Mexico, where I met my wife, Teresa. And we got married back in '78. I met her in '77 in December, and we were married right away, and we've been married ever since, 44 years now. We I worked for Sun's Dairy for 10 years. They were pretty well known back then, but they went out of business back in 87. Sorry, I got the numbers inverted. After that, I started my own business. I worked in menial jobs for a while, and then I was working for Beaverton Cab, and I bought him out. When I bought him out, I turned it into a courier company. We're a small courier company called Beaver Express now, and we've worked for it since 1990. That's about 32 years. And during that time, I had some big experiences that I'll share a little later with you, but the big part of it is that I was drawn into politics in the Reagan years, making phone calls for Reagan. I'm a conservative constitutionalist, so I really like supply side economics. I believe in it, and I made calls for politics, but I was always on the outside, always helping other people. Mr. Richardson, Dennis Richardson, I made calls for his appointment. I was so sorry when he died. We became very good friends working out of his office. But the big part of politics was I own a small business. And I saw that Oregon is not very helpful to businessmen. And it just drew me in. So I kept looking on the ballot, and there was never a Republican running in my district against anybody. So I said, somebody has to be represented. They have to have a choice.
Sure. Is this your first run
This
for
is
office?
my third.
Okay.
I started back about 8 years ago, actually.
Okay. You run for this district several times before, or
I
others,
ran
other places,
against
other
Compost last
Okay.
time and against Jeff Parker.
states? Okay.
Okay.
Great. I don't think we've gotten. I know you told us about your career. I'm not sure we've gotten your job yet.
I work in an administrative department at Stoll Reeves. We run conflict checks to make sure there's no conflicts of interest and implement like screening between the sides when there are conflicts, and then we open the clients and the matters in our databases.
Great. I'd like to ask each of you, I'll start with you, to tell us the first bill you would introduce if elected to the legislature.
If I was elected to the legislature, I think the first thing I would do there are so many important things that I would like to do.
Sure.
But the biggest thing is I would like to address our energy grid. One of the biggest things that concern me is that our administration wants us to move into electric cars, electric everything, and I don't think we have the power to do that. without bringing on nuclear, without bringing on other things than just oil, because he doesn't want to go oil. Okay, so if you don't pump oil, you've got to find another stable thing. I mean, wind is good, and solar's good, and renewable things are good, but they aren't consistent. And they're seeing it in California with brownouts, and I don't want to see brownouts here. And if I had a car and I'm in the courier business and we have a brownout, I can't do my job, that would be pretty tough. So I'm concerned about our power grid, and so I would introduce something. I don't know how it would be addressed, but I would do something in the area of opening up nuclear power, maybe going a little longer with oil until we're really ready to move to total renewables, because I think we're jumping the gun a little bit. I do agree with renewables though. I have solar, I have a solar generator and that runs my shed and my gazebo, and everything I have is dealt with solar, so I really love the way it works, but it doesn't put out the amps, not that you can restore in a battery very long. Mine is 3 to 4 amps. So if I have anything bigger than a little pump, I'm out to lunch.
Sure. Okay. First bill.
First bill, I want to introduce a reduction of homelessness act, basically, with 3 aspects. One would be implementing the real right to rest, because I understand people don't want to have to see homeless camps, but that's where people are, and if we don't stop implementing, if we don't start inflicting harm on people, or stop inflicting harm on people, they can't start to get out of the position that they're in. Every time we have a forcible removal of people and confiscation of their things, I know that they're not supposed to confiscate important personal documents and medication. That's not the reality of what's happening on the ground. So a right to rest would stop that. And then they can work on getting out of homelessness instead of fixing the problems that we've reaped on them from a forcible removal. We also should lower the rent stabilization rate. There's been a lot of media coverage about how the cap is 14.9% that you can raise rent this year because it's 7% plus inflation, but who got a 15% raise last year, like, to cover that? That's a lot. So we need to look at lowering the whatever it is in addition to inflation. And then the third thing is there is a prohibition on rent control at the state level. If we remove that, then local jurisdictions could implement their own rent control as they see fit, when they see fit. They can be far more responsive than the legislature and much faster at responding to what they're seeing on the ground than waiting for the state to do something about it.
So you want to remove the state's rent cap?
No, so those are 2 things. We have a rent cap supposed to stabilize, but there's also a prohibition for local jurisdictions.
You want to remove the prohibition?
Yes.
Okay. That's been a fight in the legislature before, as I recall.
That's what I've heard. I hadn't actually been following it that closely, but
I can tell you from some experience, it has been a fight in the legislature.
I'm sure it's also been a fight with the lobby.
No doubt, no doubt. Sean Jillians would be eager to argue with you on this one.
I just don't understand how we can expect people to continue to, like, survive if we have commodified basic human needs. We have to balance that.
Well, we have commodified basic human needs. It is a capitalist country.
Yeah, we have. We have to balance the fact that people actually need them with the fact that they're a commodity. And I understand people want to make money off of their investments, but we've seen the impacts of what happens when that's your primary concern and human beings are a secondary concern.
Okay. Could each of you point to an endorsement you've received that you're especially proud of? And we'll start with you this time.
I'm really proud of all of them, particularly the unions, but the one that, like, has the most personal meaning for me is the Teamsters. I don't know how well you know your neighbors, but my parents worked for CF, Consolidated Freightways, which is headquartered, whoever owns them now, a couple blocks away. So the Teamsters drove for them, and I worked at Freightliner. And when we would talk about products we'd be worrying about the users, and a lot of them were Teamsters. And then after I got the endorsement, I heard they don't always endorse. And so that made me feel even more proud because they don't get involved in every race. And cool.
Great.
I actually don't have any endorsements. I do belong to NFIB, which is small business. And for this race, I asked for their endorsement, and they said that they only pick the ones that have a fighting chance of winning. And my district is nearly very overwhelmed with the Democrats. So a Republican, just having an R in front of them, I think, gives me, I'm the dark horse.
What
So
is,
it was
what is
very
the breakdown of this district in terms of voter registration?
like 9,000 Republicans to a lot higher end.
It's plus 20 Dems, plus 20%.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right. That being said, the question that I then have for both of you, but particularly for you, is where do you break from your caucus? What's some place where you can demonstrate independence from the Democratic caucus, given that you're an overwhelming favorite in this contest, and yet you must represent people who do not agree with you?
Well, I have a lot in common with the people who don't agree with the Democratic Party. I have often found issue with some of the things that they do. I guess one of the things the legislature has done that still, I'm still salty about it, is the PERS cuts, and I'm not even a public employee. Like, I thought that was wrong. We should be keeping our promises to public employees. They take jobs that have lower wages than the private sector with a promise of good benefits later. So that's a huge one.
Okay, yourself.
Let's say the question again. What?
Some place where you would break from Republican Party orthodoxy.
I went to a couple things as a PCP, a couple of their conventions, and every time I went into the thing, I was talking about justice. See, I have a son who did go to jail, prison actually, and it made me realize that there's a lot of injustice in our Justice Department. And not that he did not deserve what he got, but what I really feel is that we need to have a calmer, kinder response to people who make mistakes. And that really does break with the Republican stance to a big degree. I'm against the death penalty for all in any situation because it's so permanent. If you made a mistake, you can't take it back. It's not right. So I oppose them, and mainly in criminal justice and their rough stance on it.
I think that's a good point. Lucas.
What is there any particular changes you'd like to see? Like if you were in the criminal justice system that you would try to push through?
For sure, I would try to get rid of the death penalty.
Yeah, besides that.
That's for clear. I would also look in the wording of it. I actually was going through the wording of it, and I got some words changed in our charter, in the Republican charter. It took 2.5 days to change 2 words. But they're really staunch on what they believe, and it is hard to move them. But the main thing I would want to do is get rid of the mandatory sentencing. I think a judge is there for a reason, and to take his power away is wrong. That's really the first thing I would do.
So repeal Measure 11, basically.
What's that?
Repeal Measure 11, like the...
Right,
yeah,
Measure
yeah.
11 is the big one that I voted for it. What can I say? But I didn't know the repercussions until it affected me personally.
Got it.
So, and they use it as a plea bargain where you're dealt, we're gonna completely kill you or this. You don't have a choice. And it's a tough situation to find yourself in. And as a father, it's tormenting. And to see your child go away for 7 years is tough. It's over now, and he's living a good life, and he's back in business and doing well. And I like Oregon for that thing. We need to have restoring their rights after they get out, after they've paid their duty to society and really changed. There's a lot that don't. I've met some of his friends that I wouldn't have in my house, but there are a lot of them out there that are good people that just made a mistake.
Yeah.
And they don't deserve to take the key and throw it away.
How about you? Is there anything on the criminal justice side? What would you like to see
We're on
changed
the
in
same
Oregon?
page here. I joined Amnesty International in high school, and their thing is abolishing the death penalty. So I used to want to be a public defender that abolished the death penalty when they grew up. So that's a huge thing. I also really want to repeal Measure 11 because in addition to the fact that we have judges for a reason, we have individuals who are supposed to get their trial, and you take into account their individual circumstances, and Measure 11 takes that right out of their hands. And because you're throwing the key away, I know someone personally who, when I was in high school, their boyfriend got Measure 11 as a juvenile, and it messed him up for the rest of his life. Like, that is unacceptable. And like, it didn't just ruin his life, it ruined everyone around him's life. Like, having to deal with somebody who is now broken and abusive, where he learned that behind bars. I also know that the public defender issue is a huge problem right now. We got national coverage on Vice about how bad it is here. And I know that was eye-opening for a lot of people, but it wasn't really surprising for some of us who've been paying attention. So I know they've asked for $350 million. They got $100 million. I would want to see why they didn't get that full funding. I didn't follow that discussion that closely. And the staffing issues that everyone's having across the board, like looking at pay, looking at benefits, and looking at maybe not having attorneys have to do everything because they're doing so many administrative tasks. I work in a law firm. We spend a lot of time in administrative tasks. When we talk about not wasting attorneys' billable hours because it's the private sector, but like in the criminal justice and public defender sector, you're taking them out of the courtroom, and that's really where they need to be.
How about Measure 110?
I am really annoyed that we're already talking about repealing it. I mean, not we, just that conversation is out there. They haven't given it enough time. I also was in a lobbying meeting with the co-chairs of Ways and Means, and one of those co-chairs happens to be running for governor. And it was a very contentious discussion to get them to fully fund it. And so if you intentionally are underfunding programs, that will cause them to fail, like you're making your own negative thoughts about the measure come to fruition, and we're talking about people's lives here.
So you don't think there's any changes? You think we just need to wait for the money to roll out?
I think we also need oversight of what happens, and I think that's where the legislature gets to have, we get to have the purse strings of the executive, and we get to have oversight. And I still haven't learned exactly how we exercise that oversight, but I will be very interested to find that out. And if I'm in the legislature, make sure that we're exercising that right or duty.
So a lot of people have come in here and talked about how they're not pleased with the execution of Measure 110. You're the first person who's come in here and said you think it's been sabotaged.
I mean, that's a really strong word, but I guess to a degree, it's been undermined.
Sure, I'm your words, not. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, right? So, like, but you're suggesting it is being undermined by people.
Yeah, and I mean that's my personal experience from that lobbying meeting with the Ways and Means co-chair. So maybe that's just a skewed view, but
who is the Ways and Means co-chair?
The one running for governor, Betsy Johnson.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a very contentious meeting. She had her own constituents in it, and I don't know, it just felt like, I don't know why you're being so mean about it when we're talking about giving people addiction treatment and services. Like, I don't know, maybe she was just playing devil's advocate, but given how she is on other things, I'm not so sure.
Fair enough. Measure 110.
I do not know about Measure 110.
Fair enough. I want to give each of you the opportunity to ask each other a question.
I think you started with me last time.
Do you want me to start?
Sure. Ask your opponent a question.
Okay? Since fossil fuels, basically from my first statement, since fossil fuels are being cut back and we need a solid grade, power grade, grid to keep up everything, what would be your solution? Would you bring on nuclear power? Would you, what can we do to stabilize it? Or would you continue with the oil? How do you feel about that? We have to have something stable. Where would you go?
I don't think that you remove stuff before you have a solution in place, so it's got to be slow. But we're already on the way, and I think we should be investing in public works projects that reinforce that grid. I understand that we have private companies in charge of a lot of it, so you would have to navigate how you work on building stronger infrastructure when you're the state and they're a private entity. But it has to happen because this is in the public interest. And I've heard that there's transmission problems with the wind and solar, getting it from where it is to where the people are. So I'd want to work on strengthening that, making sure that we have all the stakeholders at the table. And I also want to make sure we're using union labor because they have apprenticeship programs and they know how to get the job done right and fast.
You can now ask your opponent a question if you want.
You're very hard to find information on, so all I could find was a pamphlet article and your voter's pamphlet statement. And in the pamphlet article, you referred to minimum wage laws as extreme minimum wage laws, and I want to know if that means you think the minimum wage is too high. Like, what do you think the minimum wage should be, and how does that compare to where we are now?
I personally don't believe there should be a minimum wage, but I would never legislate that. I think that the market, I'm a true Friedman person who likes Milton Friedman a lot and has read a lot of his work. And I agree with the invisible hand of competition. And I believe that minimum wage actually has set us so high here that it makes it almost impossible to find good work. People right now after the pandemic, you can't even find people to work. I'm having a very difficult time filling spots, and minimum wage doesn't affect me so much as I have to be at least 5 steps ahead of it. That's $5 or more ahead of that to have good drivers that are dependable. We are a boutique company so that we do things for premium prices. So I can honestly say that the people I choose are very, very good at what they do, and I can't afford when the minimum wage is $15 an hour, and that's what I was paying before. Now I'm sitting at 20, 25, if they have CDL, 30, maybe $40 an hour. And how do you stay in business when you're charging for a run $100 and you can't even pay the rest of the bills? You can't even cover the insurance after you've paid payroll. So if you have to meet a payroll, I don't know how many people, there are a lot of small businesses suffering the same thing I'm telling you right now. And the minimum wage is outrageous in this state compared to many other states, not California, but many other states. And I would have toned it down a little bit. I think $7.50 is too low, but $15 an hour is too high.
All right. One last question. Actually, there's 2 last questions because I have something I need to ask at the top that I didn't ask, which is I need each of your ages.
Do you want me first?
Sure.
I'm 67 years old.
Great.
Pretty sure I'm 37 now.
All right.
Sorry, I forgot to say.
I had a birthday in between.
I know the feeling. And then this is a question we ask every cycle. We ask something fun every cycle. We try to find something that will at least amuse us, and sometimes it amuses the candidates as well. If you could only have one meal left, or tonight was your last night on Earth and you could only have one meal, what one food would you have to have on the menu? So I'm not asking for the full menu, I'm just asking for the one food you've got to have. It can be a dish, it can just be one ingredient, but one thing you have to have.
I have trouble picking dinner every night because of this question. Potatoes, like fries, potato salad, mashed, baked potatoes.
Nice.
Great.
Mine would be hash browns.
Also
Oh,
potatoes.
agreement.
Look at
So
this,
much
we brought- we
agreement
brought you
between you
down.
two.
Finally, we find common ground. Thank you so
I like
much to
that.
both of you. Really appreciate you coming in tonight, and have a lovely evening.
All right.
See you too.
Thank you. That was painless.